So back to the Great Hall for our penultimate panel of the day, and this one's going to be fantastic. It is Secrets of the C-Suite. First of all, I'm going to introduce our panel, then do a little bit of a temperature check with the audience, and then really get under the skin of what purpose means in practice for the C-Suite and lessons we can all learn from. So first of all, thank you to all of our brilliant panel. I'm just going to check my notes here. So for intros, we have next to me Matthew Owen, CEO of Cool Earth. Matthew's dynamic leadership has led Cool Earth from strength to strength in the last 15 years, from one community partnership in Peru to 40 projects in tropical rainforests across the globe. With a background in development and financial analysis, Matthew is passionate about working with rainforest communities to combat climate change. Welcome, Matthew. And next to him, we have Judith Everett, Executive Director of Purpose, Sustainability and Stakeholders at the Crown Estate. She's a member of the Value Creation Committee and sits on the group leadership team. Judith is focused on driving forward the Crown Estate's commitments on sustainability with a focus on net zero, biodiversity, and the organisation's role as a purposeful business. And then next to Judith, we have Martin Bunch, Managing Partner of Bates Wells, a values-driven city law firm. Bates Wells, if you haven't heard of them, have been instrumental in driving the B Corp legal change. They are a B Corp themselves and have spearheaded a number of firm-wide and systems change initiatives, such as working on projects like the Better Business Act. And then we have a new addition to our panel, so thank you and welcome Gavin, CEO and founder of Icebreaker One. Icebreaker One do many things that I'm not always completely understand how to explain, but essentially they drive a lot of the work happening in the UK on open energy, open data, and Gavin is also an expert in open banking. Most recently, well, in fact, just yesterday, Gavin was announced as co-chair of the government's Smart Data Council and is leading on Perseus project with Bankers for Net Zero, which is automating SME sustainability reporting. So before I hand over to all of you, I just wanted to I think we've got a Slido poll coming up here. Brilliant, thank you. So now the temperature check for me. What's one thing, can't actually read that, sorry. What one thing could your organisation do to turn purpose into impact? Interesting, new partnerships winning. Okay, communication now coming out as a front runner. I'm really enjoying watching this change as everyone's getting on board. So I think what we can see really is all of these are great options, and actually in this room, it is about long-term thinking. It is about employee engagement. I'm loving this jumping around. It is about partnerships. It is about innovation. It is about employee action. So we know there's not just one thing purpose should drive, and it's been fascinating today getting to know you all and seeing which different areas of purpose everyone's working with. I just wanted to do one more bit of temperature check before we start this panel. So who here in the room is part of the C-suite in their organisation? Okay, you guys. Who here thinks that the C-suite is a barrier to achieving sustainable outcomes? Who thinks the C-suite is exponentially driving sustainable outcomes in their organisation? Who here couldn't answer because it might be a career-limiting thing to put up your hand? Okay, fantastic. So I think that's just really interesting to know as we go into this. And now over to the panel, and I'll start with you, Matt. Could you just tell us a little bit about what purpose means to you in your organisation and in your role?
Very good, thank you. And thank you for being on such a auspicious panel. I'm not the first panel member who's got some concerns that I've been over-promoted here. But putting that to one side, purpose for us is all about recruitment and retention. It's a rather dull answer and one we've not really heard about today. But to be honest, we're a charity, Cool Earth. We raise a lot of money, about 5-6 million a year, and we give 95% of it to people who live in rainforests because they're the only ones who have any track record whatsoever of keeping forests standing for more than 10 years. WWF, wonderful. Nature conservation, marvellous. The Congolese government, so-so. The people who live there, though, do a great job, and we just make their communities more resilient. And whilst it's a really inspiring job, and we have an extraordinary team, we can't hire the right people from within charity circles. And the problem with charity circles is that not all the skills are there. So I'm afraid purpose and the fact that we will end tropical deforestation and be one of the 3 key things we need to arrest the climate crisis over the next 10 years. Our 10-year shopping list, incidentally, is stop methane, stop coal, and stop deforestation. If we're going to do that, we need those people. So actually having a purpose that gets really smart people from Morgan Stanley, KPMG, in some cases WWF, but the really best possible people who can achieve our mission is by making them part of something they think will actually give purpose not only to the organisation but to themselves. So it's kind of a way of getting people we don't deserve to have, and we have them in schools. We have 100 people now, 70% of them are in Peru and Papua New Guinea, and honestly, if I tried to hire them with 10 times the budget and no purpose, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Brilliant, thank you. Judith?
Yeah, that's really inspiring. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, for speaking from the Crown Estate's perspective, we're a purpose-driven organisation. I think Solitaire this morning talked about if purpose isn't actually in your constitution, it can potentially go with any change in leadership. We describe ourselves as a company for the country. We're governed by an act of parliament. We're set up to manage the resources that we run and operate on behalf of the company, to generate prosperity for the long term, in perpetuity, basically. And just a couple of years ago, I was really privileged to be part of a team that looked to re-articulate our purpose, not to create it, because it's there, but to really re-articulate it. And we did work with colleagues across the organisation at all levels. We worked with our key stakeholders, we worked with our board, and we worked across the C-suite to really make sure that everybody bought into this re-articulation, which for us is creating lasting and shared prosperity for the nation. And it's really about reminding us in everything we do every day of the year that it's about that end goal and that end outcome. And I think Margaret spoke about understanding what are some of the problems you're trying to solve, and then looking at how you can tune your resources into doing that. And our strategy was reframed in light of that purpose to really look at the areas where there's a big push within the UK, but more widely to look at creating solutions. And so the 3 areas of our strategy are very much aligned with our purpose, and they are helping the UK achieve net zero, to help create and enhance biodiversity, so not forget nature in that quest, and also play a role in creating thriving communities, all underpinned by economic growth. And so in terms of how we use our purpose to not only recruit people, it's a huge play in people wanting to join and then stay with the organisation. It's also what drives our strategy and what drives our operating model. And we've rewired the whole organisation to basically work alongside that purpose. It's a long process, so we're still relatively early in it, but I think it's fair to say that it really does motivate people on a daily basis. It certainly motivates me, and my role is to make sure that we're aligned, but it's about having it very democratically owned across the organisation and have people who work with us really get what our purpose is about, so that we're really harnessing the energy and that enthusiasm to fulfil the purpose in a way that delivers outcomes for the UK.
Thank you. Well, we're a B Corp law firm. Many people might question what purpose a law firm has. Actually, we're trying to change the whole perspective towards the law and professional services through being a B Corp. Purpose for us is core to what we do and who we are. The B Corp purpose and our purpose is about having a positive impact on society and the environment and our people. We follow a triple bottom line, which is planet, people and profit. And we think profit with purpose is perfectly possible because it enables us to do all the things that we want to do. Purpose is crucial to my role in running the firm. It informs all the decisions we take. It informs our strategy and informs what we do. Again, it helps us with recruitment because we find that especially the younger generation of lawyers, the millennials and below, only want to work for a company which has purpose. It informs the work we do because we use the work we do to have a positive impact. And so we can use the law to change our society and the environment. And also internally, being a B Corp, it gives us a structure where we can look for continuous improvement and to make sure that we're taking account of the climate crisis and social issues and diversity in the workplace. So purpose is absolutely crucial to us as a firm.
Good afternoon, everyone. So Icebreaker 1, we're a non-profit, and our purpose is to deliver net zero. And we quite like to measure that. So part of our mission is actually to influence the financial flows so that we can measure our delivery towards net zero. And a lot of our work is translating theories of change into implementations of change. And that's a really hard job. It's at least 10 to 100 times more work to implement change than it is to think about what the change should be. A lot of the work we do is bringing together coalitions and collaborations between government, industry, third sector, to say, how are we going to do this? Not what should we all know what we need to do. There's a mountain of capital waiting to be deployed. There's thousands of solutions trying to be funded, to be deployed, and there are millions of organizations who want to go on this journey. But we're stuck. And a lot of the ways that we're stuck are around legal precedents, policy frameworks, and a lack of trust in the information flows that are going around. So we focus very much on unlocking the data, unlocking the underlying information in a way that can be trusted to help de-risk investments, help to de-risk people's strategies and measure the impact of those investments towards net zero.
Wonderful, thank you all. Really great food for thought to set up this conversation. To everyone in the audience, please do feel free to submit questions via Slido. We'll come to them in the next part of this conversation. And to all of you, please just jump in on questions. Let's have it as more of a conversation now. We don't need to go up and down infinitely. I thought I'd just share, at Brandpie, we just did a piece of research that came out 3 weeks ago that interviewed over 4,000 CEOs globally to ask them about purpose. And one of the key findings was 89% of CEOs say their organization have a purpose. Great. 88 of those CEOs say that purpose should drive long-term value. Great, that should be a given. Only 41 of CEOs who say they have a purpose say it helps them, their business, to be more sustainable, which I find frankly quite worrying. And to me screams of the fact that as a C-suite, we have more work to do, but also in terms of governance and leadership, there is a lot more we can do. So it would be really great to hear your perspectives on what more can the C-suite be doing and from a governance and leadership perspective to drive sustainable outcomes from their purpose. Judith, I might come to you first because you're nodding at me in a very knowing way.
Well, I'm quite happy to start off, but I think there's some areas that that you're, from the legal perspective, I know you're more heavily involved with. And I think for us it's been really important to effectively rewire our organisation. So I sit on our Value Creation Committee, which is effectively our investment committee. And that sends a very strong signal to everybody within the organisation that if you're putting forward a proposal that is about us investing, you need to have really thought through the natural, the environmental aspect to it and the social impact of that particular activity so that we're taking investment decisions in a much more rounded way. I mean, ideally, that's coming through the strategy that I mentioned when I first spoke, but also how we're looking at projects, how we're working with external partners and communities and our customers to define our projects and our activity. But at the end of the day, when it comes to an investment, my position sitting around that table is a way of saying that I can veto those investments if we're not actually holding true to what we've said that we've started off doing. So, I think that's a way of rewiring the organisation and really making sure that it's clear that this is not something that is the domain of one person or one particular area.
I mean, I would say 41% is not actually that bad because many businesses will have, drunk the Kool-Aid about purpose in the last 5 years. So they would have got a consultant in, spent a great deal of money, and finally, after interminable meetings, chiselled something into granite, which they'll have put in the lobby. And they'll be quite pleased with this, rightly so, and they'll have some values associated with that. The next step they've got to take, those 60%, is then to actually say, well, these values have to be lived not just by ourselves in the C-suite, who keep it to ourselves probably, as well as maybe the marketing department. They actually have to have, as we talked about earlier, public affairs buying into this. Because if they're put in front of a Newsnight camera and actually have to defend the values that everyone in the organisation has so allegedly signed up to, then they will start to actually force that into every nook and cranny in the organisation. And that's the problem. The areas where they're most exposed, they don't feel they have to talk about purpose yet. It will come, and I think 41% isn't that bad. It will be 60% in 5 years' time, and one day it'll be 100%. But we've got to realise that these are big, big adjustments for large businesses who have had a very different approach to life for many, many years.
I'd like to pick up on a couple of the responses to the poll. One of them was culture. There's a deep culture change that has to happen within organisations. But the second topmost voted thing there was partnerships. And I think we need to readdress how we think about the problems that we're trying to face. Organisations very naturally think, oh, we have a problem, we need to fix it ourselves. But the challenges that we face are systemic. We need systems level change. And the most agency that we can have as an individual organisation is to work directly, not with just our own teams, but with our customer chains and with our supply chains. And in our challenge question, the challenge question I'd have for leaders is, how are you embracing that network effect that you're having, whether it's investing in your own supply chain to improve its sustainability and its purpose, and how are you embodying that purpose, not just in the culture of your own organisation, but in your own customers and suppliers.
To be frank, I worry that the difference between the 80% saying they have a purpose and the 40% saying it will do their business good just smacks of the purpose washing that so much is out there at the moment, actually, and that so many companies have suddenly announced on their website that they have a purpose and they don't really. I think actually some of the change will come from legislation and legislation change as well, almost forcing companies to do this. We were behind drafting something called the Better Business Act, which you may have heard of. The B Corp are actually pushing this, and it's been to the House of Commons a number of times to be launched, and Mary Portas has now got behind it. And this is changing a section of the Companies Act, which basically will say that rather than the board and directors having to worry about the success of the company, they have to worry about promoting the purpose of the company. So they have to take into account all of their stakeholders, not just their shareholders. So we move away from shareholder primacy, where everything is about the shareholders, and if the shareholders aren't happy, then the company's not doing the right thing. And if you actually move to a stage where companies and businesses are worrying about all of their stakeholders, their people, their suppliers, and actually the impacts that they have, so that all companies will have to take account of the impact that they're having, then that will start changing the way that the business does. And this will make business better and more sustainable. And actually, more sustainable business is better business. So if you don't know about it, I would encourage you to look up the Better Business Act and get behind it. And perhaps when we have an election, the government may take it more seriously too.
I just wanted to pick up on that because we took part in some work with Woodside Business School and the British Academy on that act, and how could companies embed purpose. And I think that's so important, and I really believe that enshrining that in legislation will make a difference, and then actually making sure that companies empower their employees and the people they work with to actually get on with delivering in this way as well, so that it doesn't become a box-ticking exercise. It's actually brought to life by people in their day-to-day activity, because I think the democratization of this is so ripe and overdue, long overdue. I was kind of dismayed to see, but not surprised, sadly, the hands go up on how many people think the C-suite get in the way of delivering on your purpose. And I think, sometimes we can be the blocker, and I think it's important that we democratize what the purpose of an organization is, so that people can do what they can to help align everything with it. But at the same time, you need that legislative environment, so it is what companies are working towards.
Doesn't that come back, though, to some extent to how you decide what your purpose is as a business? Because actually, if you just try and impose a purpose from the top, from the leader, I don't think that works, actually, and you need to have a purpose which everyone agrees with, and then the leaders have to be absolutely behind it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, agreed.
Could I just pick up on some of the things I was hearing in terms of public affairs, legislation, systems change, and what a purpose should do? You know, there's a huge amount of work to do on how we actually arrive at great purpose, but if a purpose statement should set out the vision of the world you want to help shape and the meaningful challenges you're trying to solve, I'd love your views on what does it mean for a business to be an advocate, or is it enough for them to just focus internally? And also, is there room for a CEO activist? What's your views on that?
I think unless you're prepared to defend your purpose and advocate for it, it's probably not worth having. And consumers and, you know, if you're a charity, your supporters and potential supporters can sniff an inauthentic, you know, purpose statement a mile off. And it's very, very easy for them to, you know, go into overdrive on social media to call out the hypocrisy if you really do start to, you know, not live by the things that you've stated. So I think that's probably the key thing. In terms of CEO advocates, I mean, I think the whole, you know, sage on the stage,
Great moment to say that.
the alpha female, the alpha male, being the person who represents, you know, the views of a business that are, you know, odd in terms, I mean, both visually and, I mean, it just doesn't sound right to most of the audience that you need to have now. I think it's really important for you to choose one thing to advocate on. I think, you know, if you have a personality at the top who can really go on and on about one thing to make sure this is forced down people's throats and they know that, you know, Cool Earth or the Crown Estate or whoever would never do this but will always do that, that's great. But we have great teams who are far more able to, you know, advocate for the work that they do day in, day out than we are.
Just before everyone else chips in, I'd just like to add a layer to that question, which is, you know, this is all at the risk of sounding a little bit theoretical. If there are any examples you can share of where advocating around your purpose has actually been a really challenging decision to execute internally, or anything around that. The microphones go down now.
Yeah, I might come back to that one, but I think it's a bit of both in terms of CEOs, activists. I think you need the C-suite to lead and to be visibly bought into as an entire group to the purpose. I don't think you can afford for it to feel like it's the CEO's pet project and therefore let them get on with it and everybody else can just carry on doing what they want to. So I think you absolutely need to be united as a leadership team, but then you do need to make sure that it is democratized, so it does go throughout the organization. And in our case, we involved our people at all levels in defining how we re-articulated our purpose, and that was really important. So I think you need very strong and very visible leadership across the top of the organisation. Otherwise, it can feel like lip service, and it can feel like you're pushing water up a hill. To actually, and that it will change if there's a new leader. So I think there's an element of how do you make sure it's really embedded. I mean, I think CEOs and activists. I think leaders at all levels of the organisation, all using our power, is a really, really important piece of our own personal purposes, and I think that's really important. I've spent all my working life in a sort of a perceived wisdom of the age of the business is all about shareholders, and actually I find stakeholder capitalism for a terminology really motivating. It's sort of something that I can really buy into, and I've tried to in my small way do throughout my career, but now the environment is hopefully changing for it to be the perceived wisdom, and certainly even if it doesn't, I certainly think it's important for leaders who do buy into this at all levels again to really step up and own that position and own that belief and be vocal about it, because otherwise things won't change. So I think we need more than incremental change. We need really big step change, and Margaret was talking about being impatient. I am too, but sometimes you have to be pragmatic to get some of those results, which I think is where she landed as well.
Yeah.
I think CEO activist is a double-edged sword. There's many examples where the person, Paul Pullman, for example, and you've got, where their organisation doesn't actually follow where they want to go, and they end up being either stabbed in the back, or they have to leave the organisation because they actually take it farther or quicker than actually the organisation is willing to follow.
I'd love to ask you, Martin, as all the work you've done as managing partner of Bateswell, and being a B Corp and speaking out in a quite different way to the sector. Have you had challenge and resistance from your partnership on what
Not so much from the partnership, actually, because we were very fortunate when we became a B Corp back in 2015, and it just felt like that was us, that was who we were, and we didn't have to go on a big journey to become a B Corp. But actually, when I went and spoke to other sort of law firms and managing partner forums where you'd sit in a round table and people would just look at you and think you were nuts, and I went to a conference and they just said, well, how on earth did you persuade your partners to do that? You know, their purpose is to make money. And especially in my profession and in a lot of professional services firms, it's a complete change of emphasis and approach. But I think it's happening, actually, and COVID and all the things that happened there did change it. And the professional services world is much slower than many other parts of the economy, but it's starting to catch up now, I think. But yes, we were seen as a bit too radical back then.
Yeah, thank you. Gavin?
I think I'd build on everything that's been said. There's a fantastic book that you don't need to read because it says everything in its title. It's called The Fish Rots from the Head. And I think without the leadership, you don't get the buy-in from the organisation. And if you can't build that cohesive cultural shift, I think very personal experience I've had over now 20 years as I'll go in at the ground level of an organisation and individually everybody will, yes, we must do something. But it's up to our managers, and you keep going up the chain and you get to the board or you get to the CSuite and they say, well, we need the leadership from the chief exec, and then the chief exec says we need the leadership from the boards, and the board says, well, we need the buy-in from the shareholders, and shareholders say we need the pension funds involved, and then you're right back to the ground floor where the pension funds say, well, we need the buy-in from our members. And so you need to build that right the way through, because individually, my experience is most people want to do something, but they don't feel that they've got the agency or permission to do so, regardless of where they sit in the organisation. So if you get together as a group at whatever level of the business and start influencing your peers up and down the chain, that can help build confidence. It's the same as politics. Politicians won't move unless their constituencies are not going to vote for them, and it's that cultural shift is a really difficult coalition building. I think one example of an organisation that I think is doing this very well is Arab. They've very publicly stated about their purpose and their drive towards net zero, but they've got 15,000 projects on the go at any one time. So how do you even begin to embed that kind of thinking into the day-to-day operations is a really hard job.
Wonderful. I've got one example from Matt, and then I'm going to sneak in one more question before we get to the audience.
It's a really quick one, and I always like to talk about it because it is the reason we have to turn down £750,000 of funding for a charity each year, which is a hard thing to do. But we get asked to be used as an offset, and as you all know, the offset market is a complex one, but 999 in every 1,000 offsets is a lie to get money, which is another way of saying a fraud. And there is no relationship between nature-based solutions and fossil carbon. And we have to be honest with people about that, because unless you correct that internal contradiction, you'll be taking money for something that will be worthless very soon, and that very soon is probably 2026 when the EU legislation comes in. But as soon as you start being rude about offsets and calling out the fraud that sits behind that, then you get into the complexity of net zero as well. And I think net zero is a hugely important thing for us to discuss. But even more important is to discuss zero and near zero, because there isn't an offset project out there that's big enough to handle the town I live in, Falmouth, let alone the whole globe.
Absolutely. Great example, thank you. I'm pausing to find the right words here. Between us as a panel, we've probably all worked in sustainability for quite a long time. And in that time, we've been on lots of different journeys, learning to get to where we are, some of them which have probably been quite uncomfortable, unexpected rabbit holes. And so to people who, we don't have time for everyone to take that convoluted journey. People need to get with the program pretty quickly to make the change we know the science tells us we have to. And so I'm curious, from a purpose and sustainability perspective, what learnings or insights have come up for you as a leader that you think could actually help leapfrog other people's journeys?
I think people just need to be bolder, and that's the one thing that I would say. I mean, we've looked at it, and it's just being bolder and not being conservative with a little c, and understanding that there is a crisis and that we need to be bold.
Great.
So it's twofold. One for me is make sure that you set really clear targets and make sure people are incentivized to deliver on them. Because I didn't believe how powerful it could be until we did that on our energy reduction. And it was incredible how much it really focused people's minds to put the effort into reducing. This is only one part of it, which is why I say it's twofold. I think it was really a lesson for me in terms of how effectively rewarding people for that work can be. Not for everybody, but for enough people for it to convince me. And then the other thing is that there isn't a binary answer. There are no easy answers. So there is an agility not to drop things that don't interest you anymore, but to actually look at this as a system as opposed to one or two simple things. So really equipping ourselves to think in a more systemic way and look at the connections. And if anything, I'd like us to see the collaboration. I think you mentioned it, but I'd like us to talk more about collaboration than competitive advantage, because I think competitive advantage can lead to some really short-term behavior.
Yeah, I'd absolutely endorse and build on that. I think building coalitions, alliances, not just inside organizations, but with your customers in particular, because your customers help move the needle on a lot of internal conversations, but also with suppliers and peers. What we're seeing is a lot of cross-industry collaboration. So even finding organizations that are not in competition with you and saying, well, we've got a common challenge here, how can we address it together? And I think underpinning this, the systemic challenges we all face are going to require systems-based approaches to addressing them. And we can only do that, we can only go far if we go together. And so finding the flag or the leader, and the leader might be anywhere, that we can just cluster around and say, okay, who's going to help build an effective coalition? And I'm also a very big fan of setting dates for impact, not just setting impact as a target for some point in the future, but by which date are we going to be able to evidence which actions? And that can really help galvanize and catalyze people in a way that is meaningful to us as humans. If you've got a target that's 5 years away, it's very difficult to engage with. If you've got one that's 12 weeks away, then you can engage and say, well, let's see how far we can get to that point.
Judith's right. Actually, provide incentives. From a personal point of view, it's very much impatience, therefore, doesn't accelerate things, which I'm still learning, and it's very frustrating. Actually, just shaking people's cages doesn't help. And if you are a large organisation and you decide that you have one of your purposes is to leave a smaller imprint and to be, free of carbon, then just put a tax on yourself. We need a carbon tax. No government has the guts to do that at the moment. Every single company and organisation here does have the guts to put a carbon tax on everything they do. And that's the only way in which you push down the unnecessary emissions in your business. That, rather than some dream of net zero, is how we actually do change things.
Brilliant. Speaking of courage, I'm now going to try and approach the edge here and see if I can read what... No, okay, I can't read that at all, so I'm going to go down there. That's not a courage thing, it's an eyesight thing. Slightly awkward setup, but we're going to manage. Okay, great. So here's a good anonymous question. Since this is a session titled Secrets, what are the secrets, as in things we don't usually talk about relating to purpose or sustainability, that you might be able to share with us? Enjoying the face of
I think
right
there's
now.
plenty of open secrets. I think there's the conversation we're having, mentioning about offsetting, as what can actually make a difference at scale when. I think we've had also an open secret around purpose washing. I think if you look back 2 years at COP, everybody announced these very ambitious long-term targets. And we all knew that it was going to be extremely difficult for organizations to turn those targets into plans. And last year we certainly saw a lot of organizations struggle to do that. So I think they're not really secrets. They're in the open, and we don't really grasp the nettle around a lot of them and say, we don't know how to do a lot of this.
Yeah, and building on that, I don't think it's a secret particularly, but it's more, what I'm finding is that we really need to think about, and this might sound like blatantly obvious to some of you, you're probably going to resist the temptation to go duh, but actually really rethinking how we do business. How do we go about doing things? And the models that have got us here to date, and that's particularly true when you're in the C-suite, because you've usually had a relatively extended career, and you've got things that have worked really well for you in the past, and you need to be brave enough to actually say, you know what, we're going to have to do things in a very different way, and then follow through on that, even if some of them don't work initially. So be brave enough to try different things, and that is really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think mine would be that actually that you have to remove people who don't actually agree or follow your purpose. I think it was the expression was people standing in front of the bus and getting them on the bus. And actually, the thing I never realised was that you had to actually be courageous enough to actually remove the people who did stand in front of the bus and stop the way your organisation wants to go. And actually, the only way often is not to try and placate those people, but it's actually to remove them from the organisation.
Yeah, and maybe just to build on that, we were doing a huge purpose project, an employee value proposition for a global consulting organisation. And what I loved that the CSO said was like, look, yes, we need to involve everyone, but we don't need an EVP that is for everyone. We need one that is bold and courageous and attracts the best people to work here, because if actually you try and placate everyone, who are you bringing on that bolder journey? Thank you. I'm just going to keep us moving. We don't need to all answer everything, but speaking of open secrets, and thank you for whoever brought this up, should we talk a little bit about diversity on the C-suite and how major a challenge that is for driving progress for a more sustainable future?
Shall I start
Yes,
with that?
please.
Yeah. So I think diversity is a big challenge for organisations, and certainly for us, we've tackled primarily gender diversity. So we have a 50-50 leadership team. Our board is also 50-50, men, women. We've looked for ethnic diversity, so our board has some ethnic diversity. And within the organisation we have some, but not enough. And our gender diversity is patchy in terms of some teams is quite good balance, some parts of the organisation are not. But I think one of our biggest challenges, the two biggest areas of challenge are ethnic diversity and socioeconomic diversity. Those are for us the big areas of really pushing ourselves and looking at how we can improve our performance on that and create an environment where people belong and feel that they could come to join us and be really successful.
Yeah, and maybe Gavin, when you come to this question, we talked on our earlier panel about carbon tunnel syndrome and just focusing on decarbonisation, and often that takes priority over equity. Sorry, Martin, you're about to go. I just started talking over you. So just any perspective of, how do we make sure that our purpose and the mission we advocate for is actually serving everyone, not just the status quo of today?
All the easy questions.
All the easy questions.
Goodness. Well, I think here transparency just is one of the key drivers. I used to run the Open Data Institute with Sir Tim Berners-Lee, and we're just advocating there for publish what you have, publish the diversity within your own organizations. It might be extremely painful to do that, but it helps to orient everybody as to where are we actually today. So I think the using transparency as a lever both internally and externally to hold ourselves to account as organizations and to hold our suppliers to account and so on is one of the levers of change there. And I think we can learn from other sectors. So if you look at the anti-modern slavery statements that are now mandatory, you must publish a statement on your website. There are services out there that then go and scrape them all and tell you who's copied and pasted from each other. And give some qualitative assessments as to, well, if you've got a really long one that seems quite detailed, you probably have a better internal policy. Whereas if it's 3 paragraphs, maybe less so. So I think there's lots of different levers using transparency to affect change and influence and lead as well in the process.
Thank you.
Can I add two other levers that we found are really important ones? We're, like many charities, 80% women, and in terms of our CSuite, which is a term I hadn't come across before today, is we're about 40% are from Peru, 10% from Papua New Guinea, the rest are European. And we can improve that. And the way we improve it is by giving budgets to groups who actually don't sit in Europe in the HQ. And that's the key thing we've done. So our largest budget holder is based in Lima. Our second largest budget holder is based in Alatau in Papua New Guinea. And power follows money and money follows power. So that's the easiest thing to do. The other one, which is kind of a quick fix, is making sure your meetings are uncomfortable for your European team. Because if I have to get up at 6 and roll straight into a meeting, it at least means Papua New Guinea are finding this a more sensible time than they've had to live with for the last 5-10 years. And definitely if I'm staying up at 9-10 o'clock, then it's easier for Peru. Making sure that you are far less Eurocentric in the simple things is the way that we've actually changed the organisation. And now 2/3 of our most important meetings actually occur just between Peru and Papua New Guinea, with DR Congo and UK phoning in.
Thank you. Martin.
I think the importance of diversity is that the danger of an echo chamber, if in any position, just simply makes bad decisions, and echo chambers make bad decisions. Actually, unusually, we're 60% of our firm is female, and also more than 40% are 60% are under 40. So I think actually now looking at how to diversify is the only way to remain successful and sustainable in the future. How you encourage that, I don't know any good examples, except that being a B Corp, we're required to produce an impact report every year. That impact report requires you to set out your statistics and such like. And when you're having to put these down on paper and report to them and put them on your website, the transparency, which is another principle of the B Corp movement, it does encourage that diversity. And diversity gets better decisions, and again, it's better business.
Thank you. Okay, another challenging one, guys. Purpose is great, but given where we are today in terms of climate change, inequality, social justice, is it fair to say that all purposes are failing and we're not doing enough?
It's not a bad assumption to make for where we are now, but the fact that we have, I know, hundreds of very bright people in this room today caring about this, the fact that we have many large organisations with purpose leads, I think it's enormously encouraging, because it actually means that these issues generally are getting into the veins of big businesses, small businesses, NGOs and the like. So, I mean, I'd hate to think what the world would be like if we didn't have any care for purpose. I'm very optimistic that as we see so many parts of the world go to hell in a handcart, the fact that we are engaged about these issues still, the fact that we are recognising that the climate crisis is linked to the migration crisis, that it's linked to the security crisis, and they all need to be addressed in a very holistic manner that will cost us money and will see taxes go up, is enormously encouraging. Because until we actually get to that point of being honest with ourselves, and maybe that's the really big dirty secret that we have to admit to, then huge issues that we are terrified of will only keep getting worse.
Brilliant. Message of hope there. Thank you.
I'd take a bit of a part optimist, part pessimist. If you work in climate change, you go up and down in your optimism and pessimism on a daily basis. Obviously, we've got massive progress. There is a huge movement here. And a word of caution. When we felt, if you go back to 2009 when we passed the Climate Change Act in the UK, there was a huge sense of we can get it done. And then the financial crisis kicked in and basically put the entire sustainability movement on hold for about a decade. And we have really serious global conflict upon us. It's in flight. And obviously one of the consequences of climate is increased conflict. So I think part of the call to action there is, as we develop our purpose statements, whatever they are, is also developing mechanisms to hold firm on the rudder when the waters get more choppy.
Thank you. I've simultaneously had an anonymous question saying, is there hope, and the 10-minute warning sign, which tells me that this is time to lift it up into pragmatism and out of the despair. So throwing that challenge to you, Judith.
So with the same question, yeah, I'm an optimist by nature, although I do worry as well. So I spend a lot of time digesting the news and then getting even more worried. But I think there is so much activity happening. So if I think of my own organisation, we work in offshore renewables, regenerative agriculture, looking at how do you decarbonise real estate, which is one of the really large emitters, and also looking at how do you create thriving communities. And we really intend to play our part in that. We haven't got all the answers. We don't expect to do it all ourselves, but we really want to carry on being part of the system that does that. Yes, we focus primarily in the UK, but we share a lot of that knowledge internationally. We've shared our approach to offshore wind leasing, etc., around the world. We work with governments around the world to share what we've learned, and we work with companies from around the world, customers from around the world. So I think we're really focused on taking a long-term view, and we've been around for 200 plus years. We certainly see ourselves, as there was a session earlier on ancestors, we see ourselves as really needing to be the generation that leaves the Crown Estate in a way that is really great for the generations that come after us, not only just working for the organisation, but that can benefit from it within the UK and more widely, depending on where we share that knowledge. So I feel pretty optimistic. I don't think in a naive way. I just think there's a lot of focus on this area. And if I think of who I spend a lot of time with, taking your point about echo chambers being really dangerous, I think you do need to really meet with people who also challenge you as opposed to just agree with you. I think there's an awful lot of activity, serious activity in this space, and the legislative environment is changing to make sure that we are all having to declare on TNFDs, TCFDs. There's a requirement from business to be more transparent that is going to keep us under pressure. So greenwashing is not going to be something that is a success strategy for a company that wants to stay around for the next few generations.
Lovely. This is the last question from the audience to Martin and Gavin, though anyone else feel free to check to answer as well, which is, how does purpose and shared purpose allow us to have a different level of success with pre-competitive collaboration?
Well, I think actually purpose and shared purpose is the only way that we're going to have a sustainable future and successful in business. And business won't be the only way that we can make change, and we need government to step in as well. But I think business can be a huge factor in change, and I think purpose and shared purpose will be the way forward, and it's the only way forward. And I think, going back to your point about being optimistic, I think actually you couldn't have had this summit 5 years ago, and I don't think there wouldn't be hardly anyone turning up to it. I think now the awareness and the enthusiasm, especially from the younger generations, is coming through, and that will change things. And I think if business doesn't wake up to that, they won't be around. There's a statistic that, the number of FTSE 250 businesses that were expected back in 1950, they lasted about 60 years. In 2000, it was like 20 years that they were expected to last. So I think to be sustainable and to have a good future, you have to embrace sustainability and purpose.
I think maybe just building on this shared purpose and collaboration and so on, is to take ownership and embrace a sense of agency. And that's a really difficult thing to try and do in any organisation. And we do have a massive cultural challenge ahead of us in enabling everybody to have agency in what we're trying to achieve. And so the more we can do that together, the more likely I think we are to achieve that common purpose. So I think maybe a practical thing, bringing on to your last question, is if you can give agency to somebody, please do, and encourage them. If you would like to take agency over something, either ask for it or take it, and get together with peers and colleagues to move forward, because we don't have time.
Wonderful. I think I'm going to come to you for another takeaway, so you're going to have to do 2 now. But just, just to your point about hope, I think it's a really important one. And to anyone who is sitting here today and feeling a little bit like this is overwhelming, the next session is going to be winners of the Global Good Awards in the Spotlight, and it's just such a phenomenal source of inspiration and hope. So that's what's coming next. It will lift us all up for the end of the day. And let's take a moment to recognise that this is the first Purpose Summit. Sorry? Indeed. And Karen will tell me I've got the numbers wrong in a second, but over 200 people will be coming through the doors at some point today, which is a phenomenal thing. And so, recognising that we've heard a lot today, we might be in an echo chamber, we all think like this, we don't need more talking shops. I'd love to hear from you each, just if there was one thing that everyone would walk away and do differently as a result of being here today, what would you love that to be? And Gavin, I'm afraid you've got to pick another one. Who wants to go?
Okay, I'll kick off. People always talk about the most admired companies in the world, and the reason I work in climate crisis charities is because I have 5 children, so I have a lot to give back. But it means I'm also an enormous fan of Crayola, the felt tip and crayon-making people. And they're owned by Hallmark, and Hallmark has been around for 120 years, and they've had the same purpose throughout, which is just making it a wonderful place to work. Because to be honest, if you do make a wonderful place to work, you will last 120 years because you'll have the purpose and you have the buy-in from your team, which is so essential. And whilst I can, be very critical of lots of things related to sustainability, the thing that has made Cool Earth grow and grow for 15 years and means we're going to double in the next year is because we have a team that in large part have been where the whole time. And I think that's the key takeaway for me. If you're actually going to live the purposes that you want to have and the values that you think are so important, then getting buy-in from a happy team is the only way you'll do it.
Thank you.
I would say each of us using our agency and actually really stepping into the power we each have in whatever position we're in, whether it's as a consumer, in the work you do, in the role you play in society. And I think that's really, really, really empowering. And it's important that whatever the little voices say in front of us about that, in our own head about that might not be the right time, or I might look stupid or whatever. I think we're in this age now where we really need to step into taking our agency and using it in whatever walk of life we see ourselves in. So that would be my one takeaway.
I'm a huge fan of the B Corp movement, and I asked the founder of the movement about what his dream was, and his dream was that not all companies become B Corps, but all companies start acting like B Corps. And I think that would be my takeaway, is to look how B Corps act and perhaps follow their lead.
It's certainly a tough challenge, but I've created over a dozen companies over the last 20 years. And I think almost the common pattern in all of them, because they've always been purpose-driven in some form, is first they ignore you, and then they laugh, and then all the change happens. So we're all on that journey right now, and it is normal to hit resistance, but you're not alone. And find your peers and work on that shared sense of agency, and then we can navigate it, and you'll end up with business partners who just go, well, of course we're going to do that, and then go and win.
Wonderful. And maybe if I'm allowed to add one, it's when you're defining your purpose, really be bold in your ambition and think how you can reframe your organization's thinking. So it's about how are you the best for the world, not the best in the world, and how does that enable you to drive radical collaboration instead of competition. Thank you, everyone. What a brilliant panel to be part of. I'm privileged to chair. Next, we have winners in the spotlight. If you know you're meant to be speaking in this session, please come up to the front. Martin and Karen will tell you what to do. Thank you, everyone. Great session.